So right before this video begins, I am back on the scene of where we filmed, and I'm just gonna go over how I put this together and how me and my friend Dori were able to go ahead and film this last night. In creating this, the only materials that I used were these big giant popsicle sticks, a roll of tape, and a Sharpie. From there, I got some nice thick cardstock. I taped the popsicle stick to the back here. Taped it twice just to make sure it wouldn't flop around and blow around in the wind. It was pretty windy last night. It's still windy today. And then took the Sharpie, drew it on here nice and large, and I drew the date, and then I also drew the distance from the end of our calendar. For the beginning and end, I used these big poster boards. This is about a 2.5 to 3 foot poster board by about 1.5 foot here. And I just wrote on really big letters today. And I did the same for the start of the calendar as well, which of course was the formation of the Earth. On the back, I just took 2 wooden dowels and I taped them again with that same Scotch tape, put it into the ground, made sure to measure out the correct distance for it. Since I am about 6 feet tall, it was relatively simple to measure out 3 foot strides, or about a meter long. And so all I did was I took one large step, and then with that one large step it was approximately 1 meter, 3 feet, and I was able to just count out my steps and then got an approximate 100 meters, which was the full distance of our calendar. And from there I would just walk and then place different markers as I would hit those markers. So currently we are setting it up. We are making sure that all the distances are proper, and we are getting everything in place. We made sure to take the popsicle sticks that I used for the backs of these, 2 strips of tape just to make sure that it'll stick. Everything is good, everything is solid. And so it's a little bit windy. We had to switch spots, of course, but this should be perfect. This should do. I was a little bit worried about that concrete there, but our timeline just happens to work out perfectly, where when we set it up in this direction, we don't have any markers that place directly on that concrete. And with that, I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope it teaches you a little bit about the entire history of the Earth and sizes it down into a calendar year, into 100 meters, in a way that you can understand and hopefully perceive a little bit better, because 4.6 billion years is quite a long time. So in this video, we will be going over Earth's entire history, starting 4.6 billion years ago and making our way all the way through time until today. This will be shown through the use of a cosmic calendar of sorts, all the way from January through to December. And you can imagine Earth's history, all 4.6 billion years, having been sized down into one calendar year, 365 days. And it has been spread out over 100 meters. So as we walk, each step we take, we are taking a step through time, through millions of years with each step, as you will see as the video continues. Now, the very first event that we will be covering is the very formation of Earth. The formation of Earth was no short, cool, easy time. This was a chaotic time, a time where all of these planetesimals, or you can imagine like little planetary objects floating around the solar system, made up of rock, ice, and other minerals. They were floating around and colliding with each other. As some of these planetesimals began to gain size, they also began to gain gravity, and then would pull more in, creating this snowball effect of sorts. And after these planetesimals have come together and formed those 4 rocky planets right near the sun, closest to the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, then those still very hot masses of lava and magma, which they hadn't cooled down yet, those still very hot masses, continued around the sun, and this will begin our calendar, January 1st, still 100 meters from today, the end of our calendar. Now, as we approach here, we move further along in our calendar, and we're already a month in. We're already at the end of January, January 29th. And this is when the first simple organics were brought to Earth. And these simple organics are called amino acids. Amino acids such as glycine have been found in the tails of comets. We've been able to send up certain probes and other ways of testing the trails of comets and the exhaust from the comet. And comet impacts upon early Earth is one way that we believe that these simple organics, which later led to life, found their way to Earth. And right after that, we find ourselves already at February, 92 meters away from the finish. And now, between the months of January and February, I think this event right here, the one that brought the amino acids, these basic organics to Earth, I think that was the most important event that happened within this time period, which is why I chose to focus upon it. I think it was the most important because without these basic organics, without these amino acids such as glycine being brought to the surface of Earth, or any part of Earth, then life would have not had a chance to form. Nothing would have gotten moving, nothing would have gotten started. And so let's continue on through the calendar. We move down here, and now we are right at the beginning of March. We have March 2nd, and this is the earliest evidence of life. And this is not the earliest evidence of life within the fossil record. These are from isotopic markers. Isotopic markers are a way of finding isotopes within any material. This material happened to be rock. So when we look at these rocks were 3.85 billion years old, and they had a lot of carbon-12 in them. And that's a little bit unusual because carbon-12 usually doesn't appear without life. Life and carbon-based organisms, which all life is on Earth, it prefers carbon-12. Carbon comes in a few different isotopes commonly on Earth, and that is carbon-12, 13, and 14. And that just refers to the number of neutrons within a carbon atom. So 12 neutrons, 13 neutrons, or 14 neutrons. And those lighter isotopes, carbon-12, is what life prefers. And because we are finding so much of it, there's a pretty good chance that this right here is the beginning of life. If we were to imagine this time, this is around the time that Mars had oceans. And at this time, Mars had oceans. And let's say Mars even had life on it during this time. If Mars had life on it during this time, much of the life would have looked similar to what it looked like on Earth at this stage in time. And when we look at that, we would see, if we were to travel to Mars 3.5 billion years ago, we would see maybe some single-celled organisms. Really not even, they're kind of just like a cell with a bunch of stuff floating around on the inside. It's something that is differentiating it from the environment around it, and it is surviving on its own. That would be kind of the life that would be shown on Mars around this time, 3.5 billion years ago, when Mars was full of oceans. So now, we're going to take a bit of a leap. We're going to walk all the way down to August. And you may be thinking, that's so far in the future. It really is. Yet when we get there, we're still going to be 1.6 billion years away from today. Still 1.6 billion years in the past. We're in fact going to pass through April. We're going to pass through May. We will pass through June, July, and even most of August. And that is until we find ourselves here, August 27th, 1.6 billion years ago, or 1,600 million years ago, and 35 meters from our finish, just far in the back there. This is when the Baraboo Range was formed. Now, you may never have heard of the Baraboo Range before, but the Baraboo Range is actually a very ancient mountain range, not much of a mountain range anymore, but it used to be part of a mountain range that exists within modern-day Wisconsin. About 1.6 billion years ago, Wisconsin was underneath a giant sea. And this was a relatively shallow sea, which allowed a lot of sand deposits and sand to accumulate very, very thick on the seafloor, allowing the sand eventually to cement and then become buried, creating sandstone. After a long time of exposure to heat, and especially heat and pressure, the sandstone then metamorphized. It changed the type of rock into quartzite. Quartzite is just metamorphized sandstone. And this is what the Baraboo mountain range, the Baraboo Hills, this is what it's made out of. It's made out of this wonderfully purple quartzite. Some scenarios, this one's a little bit not the color I was looking for. In some scenarios, the rock is legitimately purple. Now, the reason that this rock right here has become that kind of a purple color is primarily because there's minerals in here. And the sandstone that was here, it kind of oxidized, right? It essentially rusted. There's a lot of iron, maybe some other, a mix of minerals that are in there. And after going through metamorphosis, it changed to this kind of a strange, light kind of purple color, which is very cool and not something you really see a lot of, especially with quartzite. Usually it'll be a more white color, so this is pretty cool. Another fascinating thing about this quartzite here is that it is ridiculously hard. It is right up there in hardness, right next to diamonds. So it's not quite as hard as a diamond, but it is very close, and which makes it, a very useful rock. It's used a lot in railroads, so anytime you're walking along a railroad and you see those rocks that are piled up along the railroad tracks, usually that's quartzite. And if you're here in Wisconsin, there's a good chance it's Baraboo quartzite. And this is the Baraboo Range, currently just a little bit of some nice hills within southwestern Wisconsin. Now we talked about some of those very early singular celled life forms. We wouldn't see this multicellular life until about October 22nd, and that wouldn't occur until we walk all the way through here just about to November. At this time, this is about 900 million years ago, making the Earth 3.7 billion years old at this point. You can see that there was a whole lot of stuff that happened. 3.7 billion years worth of stuff that happened all the way up until this point. And there's not much left until we get to the end. And we just started having multicellular life. So now, as we continue through, we find ourselves at the Cambrian explosion. We are standing 12 meters from the finish, not very far. We're on November 29th. It's almost the end of the year. Yet we're still 542 million years in the past. So the Cambrian explosion, again, was a time for many invertebrates and vertebrates when they started evolving, when this evolution of the time started taking place so fast. There was lots of prey and predator relationships that were starting to develop, and of course, because there was competition and life was hard, that is a driver for evolution, creating the Cambrian explosion. A couple of those organisms that lived at the time that are iconic to the time were trilobites, one species called Opapnia regalis, which was a predator during that time, and many other arthropods. Arthropods were a big, they were a hot shot of the day. Big name during the time. The Cambrian explosion was a great time for the arthropods, just to say the least. Now let's say life had taken to the same trajectory on Venus that it had on Earth. Let's say that the conditions weren't too hot yet as they are today. Let's say it was a much more hospitable temperature 500 million years ago, or even a billion to 500 million years ago. During this time, you could imagine that Venus would be going through a very similar Cambrian explosion of sorts. And that would have been wild to think about. You could look back and you could see arthropods, or something that resembled arthropods, on Venus, within its oceans, on its surface, wherever it might be. Quite an interesting thought, to think that maybe if Venus had hospitable conditions all the way up until this point, all the way up until 500 million years ago, it may be going through a Cambrian explosion of its own. Fortunately, it does not seem to be the case today. Now, we are not going to walk that far, yet we are going to move nearly 100 million years in the future, just by taking a few steps over. We will find ourselves sitting here comfortably November 25th, may even be Thanksgiving, 10 meters from the finish. And we are now encountering the first land plants. These first land plants, embryophytes, they were kind of weird. They weren't like your traditional plants, they were not like these trees, these ash trees that surround us right now. They were much more like modern day liverworts, hornworts, or mosses. During the Ordovician period, these plants, these embryophytes, they didn't really have much for roots. They didn't have roots. And as we look at these embryophytes and we compare them to some modern day bryophytes or some other modern day plants such as these liverworts and mosses, they are not the same, but they give us a good idea for what these embryophytes may have looked like in habitat in situ. So we're at December, 8 meters from the finish, not very far at all. And we still have 4 more events to go. And you may think of these events as super far in the past, but of course, as you've seen, we've already walked over 90 meters. And there's been a whole lot to this planet that has already happened. A lot of this stuff, a lot of the life, these 4 events here, this is all taking place relatively recently. And we know a lot more about stuff that has happened recently just because things get lost to time. As we get closer to today, a lot more fossils exist, but also fossils for a long time weren't able to exist just because hard shells or hard parts within living organisms, within these multicellular beings, didn't really exist until the Cambrian explosion, until those arthropods started coming around with all their hard exoskeletons. Those are the first great deal of fossils that we have to look for in the fossil record. As we look, we're about 2 meters from the finish, just about 6 feet. We think back to Gondwana. Gondwana had a lot of the southern hemisphere's continents in it. They all were stuck together in a supercontinent called Gondwana. Gondwana was the result after Pangaea, an even bigger supercontinent, split up into a northern and southern half. So we find ourselves in Gondwana, and of course a much warmer climate, something akin to Tasmania's climate. A lot of the plants that are on Tasmania are still, direct descendants, at least descendants, 80 million years in the making. The sunflower family is the most successful and widespread of any plant family currently on Earth today. There are over 23,000 species within the sunflower family. It's not just your Helianthus annuus or your common sunflower that you're so used to seeing. There are types and varieties and diversity within that family unlike any other family found on Earth. Some of the things that make this plant family so incredibly unique and so special is the use of compound flowers, or in terms of the sunflower family, that's called a capitula. So when you look at a sunflower, you will see that there are many little florets, which are just tiny flowers, within one flower head, making it appear as one flower, yet having many tens or even hundreds in some instances, flowers within one flower head, appearing only as one flower to something as big as us, humans. When we look at Trixus californica, this is a species within the Mutisioideae, that very ancient lineage within the Asteraceae, which is the sunflower family. This is a very cool species. This is a species that we have in Arizona. It's native to Arizona and a lot of the desert Southwest. And it gives us kind of a picture at what those early asters, those early sunflowers, what they might have looked like. Now we find ourselves 55 million years ago, December 28th. We are very close to the end of our calendar here. We are just about 1 meter away from the end of our calendar. And we are at the PETM, or the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. And what this was is it was a very, very warm period. A period of about 100,000 years, was about 4 to 5 centigrade on average globally warmer than it is today. But still, we had forests on Antarctica, again, much similar to those that you would find on Tasmania today. This was a time post the dinosaurs when mammals started diversifying. Mammals were in their heyday. A lot of those mammals were still warm-blooded, of course, but they were much smaller to contend with the heat of the day. The small size allowed them to cool off more rapidly, and a lot of the examples that you would see here would not be unlike this horse, which horses actually evolved within North America, and this is a species of smaller horse that was native to North America and evolved in North America during this time period. Now we find ourselves even closer to the end of our calendar, standing only 11.3 centimeters from the very end of our calendar, which is today, yet we are still 5.2 million years in the past. Around this time is the earliest evidence that we have of hominids. This is the group of animals that exist that include humans, so you can think of early human ancestors. Now, the very earliest ancestor that we have found is a species called Ardipithecus cadaba. And this species was found and presumed to exist sometime between 5.2 to 5.8 million years ago. The fossil record for a lot of these early hominids is very restricted and has very little known about it, just because there is not much that has ever been discovered. The only things that have ever been discovered are jaw and tooth fragments from this species. However, with these jaw and tooth fragments that were found, we can assume that they also ate fibrous foods. They were a little bit different. They probably stood upright, even though they were the size of modern day chimpanzees with their height and size of their skull. They also ate more fibrous things such as nuts, twigs, other things like that, not just soft things such as fruits and leaves. And this is 14 hours into the day. We only have 10 hours left in the day until we strike midnight on December 31st, marking the end of our calendar and the end of our year, marking today. We move just a little bit over here and we look to the formation of the Great Lakes. This again, December 31st, but this is only roughly 4.3 millimeters from the very end of our calendar. When we look at the formation of the Great Lakes, this is something that occurred in the most recent glaciation period, about 20,000 years ago. These glaciers, especially glaciers that were part of the Laurentide ice sheet in eastern North America, began to recede. And as they recede, they revealed these deep holes that they had dug out as they moved south and pushed further south. And these deep holes would become the lake beds for these Great Lakes. So as a result of these glaciers, we look around today and we are left with 5 Great Lakes: Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. Superior being the deepest at over 1,000 feet deep and the largest too. These Great Lakes provide ample opportunity for fresh drinking water, sport, and any kind of outdoor recreation, as well as trade that still goes on to this day. These lakes have played a focal point within modern human history anywhere within eastern North America and are something that define an entire region of the United States. So somewhere right in between these two signs here, about 8 minutes and 34 seconds in the past, we found ourselves as human beings, Homo sapiens, almost going extinct. The worldwide populations of humans was drastically decreased and threatened, truly becoming an endangered species of sorts due to a volcano eruption that happened in Indonesia. And during this time, with all that ash in the sky, it was a nearly inhospitable environment for these humans to exist under, and very few made it out. Thankfully, we did make it out. We're here today. There's plenty of humans on the planet now, over 8 billion, and as we think back to then, quite an interesting thought to have. when we think about the impact that that supervolcano had after it released clouds of volcanic ash and dust into the sky, blocking out the sun and causing global cooling, sending us into a very quickly onset and unexpected glacial period. Now as we moved from the Cretaceous, the end of the Cretaceous, 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs died, we moved to modern humans, which would be placed right about here. We would see a distance of 1.3 meters, or a time of 5 days within our calendar, from December 26th to December 31st. And that is all the time and space that would take up on our calendar from the distance and the age of the dinosaurs to humans. Not very much when we compare it with our whole calendar. So we began with talking about planetesimals. We then went through the months and we ended our calendar with the formation of the Great Lakes. We had all those wonderful things in between, from the Cambrian explosion a little over 500 million years ago to the first isotopic markers of life that appeared on Earth. And after all that time, after 4.6 billion years, after a full 100 meters in our calendar, after a calendar of 365 days, we find ourselves at today. So let's say we found a planet that was out there that had the same distance from its sun that the Earth has to our sun. Let's say we found a planet of similar size with a sun of similar intensity, and that planet is probably ripe for life, right? It's in the Goldilocks zone. That's the perfect place for it to be. It's in the habitable zone. It's in the area where life, at least life that we're familiar with, would exist. Let's say it was 1 billion years old. What would that planet look like now? For that, we're going to walk all the way back to 3.6 billion years in the past to put us at 1 billion year old Earth. Now we find ourselves on this hypothetical alien Earth about 1 billion years into its life. At this 1 billion year mark, life had gotten a chance to start on this planet too, which in many regards is very similar to Earth. What would that have looked like? It would have looked like whatever this earliest evidence of life looked like. So it would have been single-celled organisms. It would have been organisms with a outer layer separating it from the environment that surrounds it, and not much would have been going on inside. It's kind of existing. No predator-prey relationships, just living off the environment around it. Now I'm looking at this, and it appears that the scientists have got the dating of this planet all wrong. It's not 1 billion years old, it's 3 billion years old. Now let's say we walk all the way 3 billion years into our calendar to get a look at what life might look like on this foreign planet. Earth, when it was 3 billion years old, was forming the Baraboo Range. This was 1.6 billion years ago, making it 3 billion years old at this time. And what would have been going on at this time? Not much. We still hadn't entered the Cambrian explosion. A lot of the life that was here, or maybe even all of the life was here, wasn't even multicellular life. The first multicellular life hasn't even appeared on the scene yet. We wouldn't even have seen multicellular life yet. It would have still been eukaryotes. It would have still been single-celled organisms. These single-celled organisms would have a nucleus already. They would have been photosynthesizing, and they would have been adding oxygen to the atmosphere if this foreign planet, this alien Earth, were to truly exist. And if it were, at this time, 3 billion years old. And wonderful. In the end, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope all of my points got across nice and well, and I hope you leave this video with a little bit better understanding of Earth's history, anything from the Cambrian explosion to the formation of the Baraboo Hills, and even the first humans, the first Homo sapiens, the first hominids that became present on Earth. So again, thank you for watching, and that is my entire video. That is Cosmic Calendar.